Bit of bonus content for you right now, which is a follow-on of sorts from yesterday's video concerning these things: adjustable wrenches, adjustable spanners, shifters, if you like. I don't care what you call them, but we're talking about this implement. My thesis about this implement is that you can use it this way and press this way on the handle if you like, or you can use it this way and press that way on the handle if you like, and it doesn't really matter at all for the vast majority of applications that you might throw a wrench such as this at. But when you are pushing really heavy and there's ever so slightly the chance that you might break something, it's far more likely that that won't happen if you push this way. Okay, the way to remember it, or at least the way I remember it, is that this wrench is already bent in a sense because the jaws are here on this sort of level plane, whereas the handle is at an angle. It's 15 degrees because 15 plus 15 is 30, and that's half the angular separation between the faces on a hex, right? The adjacent ones. And that gives you wriggle room in confined spaces so that you can turn a little bit and then flip and turn a little bit and then flip and go back and then turn a little bit. And it's a tedious process, but at least you will be making progress if you do that. A lot of people who have definite views about this kind of thing tend to tell me that there's only a right way, and the right way is this way, and anytime you use it this way, you are wrong. And I'd suggest that they're wrong because it's clearly been designed to be used in both senses. But if you want to avoid breaking it when you're pressing really heavy, the best idea is in those circumstances to put load on it this way. And I stand by that, but I got a couple of comments that suggested perhaps I might have been wrong or spoken in haste, whatever. The first one is from, they were very polite too, and I don't know if I'm losing my touch, but I didn't get a single death threat. No one accused me of being an idiot. It's almost like I'm losing it. Perhaps I really am finally, at long last, over the hill. Jesus. Her Barris says, are you sure about the right and the wrong way regarding the torque? In the wrong way, the contact point between the nut and the movable claw is much closer to the base and the stress on the movable claw should be lower. Or am I wrong, he says, and got a brain fart? I make no determination as to the gaseous emissions of Her Barris's grey matter. That would be an issue for him and him alone, but I think you are partly right and partly wrong, and I'm going to explain that in greater detail in just a sec. I got another exceedingly polite email from an dude named Graham who said, I have a different analysis of the forces on the dynamic jaw of an adjustable wrench. As per the diagram below, when you push, I even provided a well-illustrated diagram, like I really have lost it. If you push in the direction of bend of the handle, the bulk of the force is on the part of the nut further from the sliding mechanism where there is more leverage on the mechanism and the jaw is less substantial. Now this all kind of makes sense to me, and what this highlights is the danger of thought experiments, right? You can do a thought experiment and you can make accurate observations based on true facts from a thought experiment, and yet you can draw absolutely the wrong conclusion. So just so we're all on exactly the same freaking page on this, I'm not using a hex today because the wrench doesn't care what the shape of the whatever in its jaws is. It just cares about its interaction with these parallel faces. Okay, that makes sense. And this is a little bit less confusing to analyze. It's even less confusing when you build a lot of slack into the equation. So let's look at it like this. The options are push this way or go that way. Which is safer for the wrench? And I absolutely get what these dudes are saying, because when you push this way, so if I'm pushing the wrench away this way, the contact point on the dynamic jaw is way down, quote unquote, low on the dynamic jaw, even though it's a high point because the wrench is inverted now. But it's down here close to the bed that the dynamic jaw slides against, right? So the hypothesis there is that because the point of contact is down fairly low in relation to this bed on the wrench here, that the bending effect on the dynamic jaw is low. And I agree with that. If we flip it and go this way, then the contact point moves from here all the way to here. And if we apply the same torque in terms of the manual effort up this end of the wrench, then the point of contact is here. So the bending of this jaw, the bending effect of a load being applied somehow here, is much higher up. And therefore it would seem that if you wanted to bend this jaw in any way, that would be the way to do it. So why is this the right way and why is that the wrong way, if the wrong way is so much better intrinsically at reducing the bending effect of the wrench? And the answer to that question is you have to think about the failure mode of this device. Like, what is the mechanism that causes it to break? And this is like a central thesis of so much engineering, failure mode analysis. It's no good making the dynamic jaw even stronger and stronger and stronger in bending if that's not how it fails. And guess what, dude? That's not how it fails. This kind of loose mechanism and the sliding of the contact point of the hex is what causes the nut to round over. So if there is one of these sort of play and bending kind of failures, the most likely thing that's going to happen with the nut, and you see this all the time, is that the wrench is going to round the nut over. So if you apply excessive load here or excessive load here, then it's the nut that's going to fail because the jaws on the wrench are harder than the nut. So obviously you've got two materials of dissimilar hardness in contact with one another, then obviously the soft one is going to fail first, all other things being equal. And that's what we see in practice. And in fact, in maintenance sheds and heavy industry and workshops all across the nation, 9 out of 10 tradies are going to refer to this thing as the nut fucker because that's what it does. There's all of these beautiful expressions that often involve profanity in these trades, okay? I love them. It's like, mate, just give us a pound on that, or just nudge it a bee's dick, right? Everyone knows what that means. I've never actually looked at a bee's endophallus, but I'm assuming it's, you know, only a few thou, so just give it a bee's dick. Just nudge it a bee's dick, mate. I've heard that so many times. Or, you know, if this doesn't work, you might have to rustle up the gas axe. Talking obviously about oxypropane or oxyacetylene cutting torch, but you know, that's the way they'd write it in the frickin' Encyclopedia Britannica, I'm sure, but out there in the field, it's just, go rustle up the gas axe, mate. I'm sick of this. I've hit it enough with me hammer, right? So these things have names that really describe exactly what they do. This is a nut fucker, cutting torch is a gas axe, small little nudge just to get something lined up. It's just nudge at a bee's dick, mate. So that's why it's got this name. The name pertains to the propensity of this contact point when it's in bending, and this one on the other side as well, to cause the fastener to fail, because that's what happens. If you want to break the wrench, it's a completely different failure mechanism. The best way to break the wrench is to drag it this way really hard at the same time as you push it this way really hard, because then what you're going to do is you're going to separate these teeth here on the worm from the corresponding teeth on the rack. They're both really hard, therefore really brittle. And if you do that under load, if you separate the jaw, if you pull it down really hard, there's elastic strain in everything. Like if you push on anything, it bends a little bit. We're talking about the wrench being in elastic strain, right? If I push on it in this direction, then what's going to happen is you can see perhaps that when it comes to the contact point just here, that there is a component of that contact force, if you like, that tends to push the jaw off the end of the wrench. And there's another component that tends to push it down here, like to pull it out of the body of the wrench. That's going to translate into a lot of load right here at the interface between the worm and the rack that it rides on. You've got the load this way that's pulling the jaw, pushing the jaw off, whatever, and being restrained by the interaction between the worm and the rack. And then you're also pulling the jaw away. If you push this way, there's a component that forces this jaw down. And what that's going to do is it's going to reduce the meshing of the worm with the rack. It's going to go from meshed to less meshed and less meshed and less meshed as everything stretches elastically in this elastic strain environment. And that's going to increase the load on the bits that are still enmeshed like that, and eventually they're just gonna break, okay? That's the failure mechanism. So even though there's less bending moment on the jaw when you're down here, it still increases the likelihood of failure because the failure mechanism occurs in here, right? That's kind of important to get. And when I go this way, then what happens is, sure, there's more bending moment on the jaw here because the contact point shifts from here to down here somewhere, but at the same time, we're still trying to jam the dynamic jaw off the edge of the wrench. So we've still got that same kind of horizontal, quote unquote, component, if you like, but the component that was pushing the wrench, the dynamic jaw away from the body of the wrench is reversed now because we're pushing this way, and that contact interaction down here on this point is in part driving the dynamic jaw into the bed of the wrench, and that's making it more secure because it's not compromising the interaction of the worm and the rack, and that's where the failure is going to occur. Now, if you don't believe me on this, I've also found out that the Torque Test channel, which is really cool, has a video where they've got a ghetto rig that's actually pretty cool, and they've broken a whole bunch of adjustable wrenches. I think they ended up breaking 4 of them and then answering some other questions about wrenches generally. I watched that video last night. It's really good, and it shows this process in operation. I'll put a link to it in the description so you can check it out if you want. But that's kind of the full explanation here. I also got, look, a bunch of comments about, I would never use these things, or I'd rather use the Knipex Pliers wrench, which is also an awesome bit of kit, and I agree. Got a set of them. Stand by. We're talking about these things, right? Knipex is just an awesome brand for pliers and tools of this nature. People think, I've had people tell me that these are really just channel locks. You know, in America, they call them channel locks, but these are not channel locks, right? These are channel locks. That's a set of channel locks, right? That's a really simple pivot. This is not that. This is a parallel jaw set of pliers, right? And it's also brilliantly adjustable. So you just press this pin here and slide the wrench along the rack, and you basically, if you do it right, you get a whole bunch of adjustments. So, you know, that's a bit loose, so we can just open it up, tighten it up a little bit that way. Probably better if I do it off the job. I'd suggest that's going to work pretty well. So there we go, right? That's a set of Pliers wrenches from Knipex, and they're brilliant, but they are also a little bit bulky in this direction from time to time. And, you know, you've got a horses for courses, basically. These are brilliant if you just need one other tool, like you've got a set of wrenches. These are pretty good for hanging onto the other end of a bolt. So are these, though. I mean, if you've got an ugger-dugger in one hand and one of these in the other hand, you just put this on the head of the bolt and you put your ugger-dugger on the other hand, and you don't actually need very much load to restrain the bolt because you've got the friction between the contact patch under the head of the bolt plus the friction underneath the nut where it contacts the job, the work, whatever, the pieces that you're joining together. And therefore, you know, Newton's still pretty happy at the end of all of that. His third law hasn't been compromised. It's just that action and reaction are equal and opposite, but half of the reaction is actually facilitated by friction. So you only need something like that to hang onto the bolt. But, you know, the Pliers wrench is also an excellent option if you just want to do the same thing. And they are a remarkably satisfying tool to use. Unlike the wrench, you can actually apply force, like clamping force with these things as well. So they're a pretty brilliant option. Now, for all the people who told me that they never use these, great, dude. If you're in a fully set up NASA spec workshop and you've got every wrench, there's probably never a reason to need one of these. And if that's you, then great. But if you're in the field, life is imperfect and you don't have the luxury of a Pantech full of tools just following you around, inevitably you will find one or more of these in your toolbox. If you're going to buy one of the things I'd strongly suggest you do is think about the play in it. If you're actually buying it in person, the kind of play that doesn't matter so much is this way or this way with the dynamic jaw. So if you rattle it side to side, that doesn't tell you anything. And if you rattle it in and out, like push it in and out, that's not going to tell you anything either, because obviously that's just reflecting the clearance between the teeth on the worm and the teeth on the rack. And you do need clearance because otherwise you wouldn't be able to move the two. There's also clearance on the shaft that keeps the worm in place. So clearance in and out doesn't matter, but the thing you really want to avoid is clearance when you go push the jaw down into the bed of the spanner and lift it back up. You don't want anything more than a couple of 100 microns, probably less there than that. You shouldn't feel very much play at all when you're pushing down and pulling back, because that really matters. If there's a lot of play there, as there would be in a cheaply produced tool, because that'd increase the ability just to assemble it and you wouldn't have to have any rejections based on tool wear and things of that nature, then that's bad for operational use, because obviously if you are wrenching on it the wrong way, it's easy to drag the jaw out of position and increase the likelihood of failure. So there's that. The other thing is, obviously these tools are not very strong. They're not as strong as, for example, this is a 32mm square bar that I was just cutting up the other day, and this is a 33mm open end ring spanner, whatever. So the open end bit is going to be much stronger than, you know, the corresponding adjustable wrench. But like the adjustable wrench, it's still better to use the open end one if you're using it really heavily to push this way, okay, as opposed to pushing that way. And obviously if you're going in the reverse sense and undoing, whereas previously we were doing up or something, then if you're undoing, then press it that way instead of, you know, pressing it this way. That's what I'm kind of talking about. It's going to be better always when you're using these things really heavy to push in a sense that increases the angle, increases the bend between the jaws and the handle if it was made of cheese. But obviously, and this is not a hex, I get that. Obviously, if you can get over the hex, the smartest thing of all to do is to use a ring spanner, because instead of 2 points of contact, you go with 6. And if you've got 6 points of contact and you're applying the same torque, then the ability of the wrench to fuck the nut is greatly reduced, because you're only applying about 1/3 of the point load at each point on the hex, right? And finally, if we're going to think about strategies for doing this and that, if you are going to go and try and undo a component that is properly seized up and is going to be really hard work, like you're in the shed this weekend and you've got something to undo and it's been corroded or Loctited and then corroded and then hit with 100 hammers, or somebody's just had the adjustable wrench on it and failed spectacularly and rounded it over even more, then your 12-point socket or wrench like this ring spanner is really not going to cut it as well as something like that, right? This is a basic impact socket, like a deep impact socket, and it's a 6-pointer. So even if the fastener is slightly rounded and very heavily gummed up and corroded and stuck in place, then this is the kind of fastener that is going to maximize your chances of remaining in contact, like you've got good purchase, and then all you have to worry about is the load. There's a few other strategies in that situation as well. Penetrating oil it's okay, but I find personally that penetrating oil works better once you've broken that initial seal and you actually do have relative motion between the nut and the threaded part of the bolt, right? Even if it's only a few degrees, penetrating oil can get down into that, you can work it in and then incrementally eke out a little bit more movement. But until that point, I don't generally find that penetrating oil helps very much, even if it sits there for like 2 days, right? The two things that I find work really well are heat and impact. And the caveats on heat and impact are, in an automotive, DIY or professional environment, doesn't matter, heat is often a bit dangerous, depending on what's on the other side of what you're heating or what's inside the thing that you're heating. I wouldn't go heating up anything with the fuel tank directly behind it, or fuel lines, or even something on or near the floor of a car, because you'll pleasantly hear with your oxy propane torch, or maybe you've just got a propane air torch. They're fine as well, although they tend to be more of a wide spectrum blast of heat, whereas your oxy propane kind of torch tends to be more focused often. So the problem is you're heating up some bolt quite focused on that, and you've got the floor of the car, you're under a hoist, the floor's up here, or you're lying on your back, on the car's up on jack stands or something, and you're not really thinking about what might be happening inside the car, where you've got underlay and carpet and things of that nature. It's getting red hot, and all of a sudden you smell smoke, and the inside of the car is a ginormous oven, right? Because you haven't been paying attention. That's kind of a disaster, suboptimal result for the weekend, especially if you've got all this flammable crap in your garage and you burn the house down, right? That's not going away in a hurry. People are going to remember that day. The kids are going to talk about it when you're in a nursing home. Remember the day you burnt the house down? And you'll have to say, yeah, I remember that, right? It'll stick with you forever. So don't do that. So heat is potentially dangerous. You just have to be really, really careful and do a risk assessment before you just start getting frustrated. You break out the torch, and then fast forward a few decades. Dad, remember Grandpappy? Dad was telling me you burnt the house down. Can you tell us that story? I love that story. I don't think you don't want that. The thing about impact is that all of these things are relatively hard, okay? Like a spanner, a wrench, relatively hard. I'm going to say the 45 HRC, like Rockwell C hardness, that's pretty hard. Okay, this is going to be pretty hard as well. The jaws on an adjustable wrench, they're all pretty hard. So hitting a wrench with a hammer is fine. I've got no problem with that. That's a really good idea. In fact, that's the whole basis of operation of the Ugga-Dugga. You can hit a wrench with a hammer all day long. Two things if you do. Thing number one, don't pick up the hammer until you first picked up your safety specs, because you don't want a high velocity projectile made of hardened steel stopping itself in your eyeball. That sucks. So have safety specs and use them, put them on before you pick up your frickin' hammer. But feel free to, hit a wrench at will. It's kind of designed for a bit of abuse like that. The second caveat with using a hammer and a wrench, if you possibly can, is get something a little bit soft-faced, like a brass hammer, such as this, or a copper-faced hammer, such as that. It's much better to have a soft thing interacting with a hard thing. If you use a ball peen hammer, that could end badly, because you've got something hard hitting something hard, and often, that ends kind of in tears. So just remember those things if you're having an intimate interaction with a stubborn fastener this weekend in your shed, and hopefully it won't come to all of those extreme measures, but if it does, at least then, take a deep breath, think about it carefully, do the risk assessment, put on the safety specs, make sure it's not going to burn the house down, and just have a bit of recreational fun, becoming that madman of metal manipulating mayhem you've always aspired to be. Have a great weekend. I'll see you next week.